Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
So in our course we have text 54. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Arjuna said, "Hear, please." That is practically the whole chapter. Arjuna listened. That is, as they say, he wound Krishna's instruction onto his mustache. And with his mustache already wound up, Arjuna spoke. And of course, we already know that this will be a question. That is practically all Arjuna says. Of course, sometimes he offers prayers. Sometimes, as they say, he expresses his opinion, as for example about yoga, that Krishna, this is beyond my strength. There. Well, that is an exception to the rule. As a rule, when Arjuna speaks, it is always a question. And these questions are also in every chapter, and now a whole chapter is devoted to answers to Arjuna's questions. So you see how Arjuna wound things onto his mustache, right? There. But people wind noodles onto their ears. The government hangs them there, as do such leaders, scientists, and so on. Whoever feels like it. Everyone who can be bothered hangs noodles on people's ears. And that is why the modern person has noodles instead of ears. You can't even see the ears, because people start being lied to with their mother's milk. And so by the end of life, so many noodles have been hung there that behind all those hanging noodles, you can no longer see the person. Like that Ukrainian song, "Behind the glass, nothing can be seen." There it is actually behind the fog. Well, as they say, kind people remade it, but the fact is that nothing can be seen. And likewise here, behind these noodles hung on people, that is, behind deception, the person himself can no longer be seen. That is, a person is already just a walking deceived being, you understand? Well, again, those are the words of Basilio the cat. While fools live in the world, it profits us to deceive them. Yes, but we see that here Arjuna was truly receiving knowledge, receiving what is called brains. And now Arjuna's question is truly the question of a knowledgeable person. Therefore, we too should accordingly keep our ears perked up. What did Arjuna say? "O Krishna, how can one recognize a person who possesses this divine consciousness?" There, please. What did I tell you that Arjuna's question is the question of an intelligent, reasonable person? All the more so because, you see, here one must also take into account Arjuna's particular nature, that he is a warrior. And warriors are always used to recognizing, you understand, the whole army is based on that, beginning with recognizing insignia, who holds what rank in the army, and ending, of course, with recognizing a well-camouflaged enemy. So recognizing is nothing new for Arjuna. He recognized things all his life. He recognized and hid and recognized. Such was Arjuna's fate. You can't say that his military fate was purely military. I would say it was mixed, military and political, because he hid precisely for political reasons there. But those are details. The fact is that the question is reasonable. Truly, a reasonable person asks the question, how can one recognize a divine person? Simply put, how can one recognize a saint? For example, we all know how to recognize a general. He has a general's stripes, a general's epaulets. Everything is clear there. Even any schoolchild can tell you that. That is, recognizing a general is easy. But how do you recognize a saint? How do you recognize one? That is, when a person, if suddenly some person says that I am a general, everyone will immediately understand. They will laugh at him and say, "What kind of general are you? Where are your general's stripes? Where are your general's epaulets and uniforms?" and so on. You understand? That is, deceiving people will not work, because people know how to recognize a general. That is just a simple example off the top of my head. But how to recognize a saintly person? Nobody knows. And therefore everyone who can be bothered says, "I am a saint." What? What are you talking about? What are you saying? I am a saintly person. Any of my acquaintances who know me will tell you that. Everyone who knows me says with one voice, "I am a saint." And an ordinary person, hearing such advertising or seeing advertising on TV or on the internet, where a person says about himself that he is a saint or something else, and his friends also say, yada 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 yada, the yes men chime in, and before you know it, all of this has spread, and now the whole city or the whole country thinks that this is a saintly person. They made a fool of the fool 6 ways from Sunday. And of course Arjuna is not one of the simpletons. not one of the simpletons. That is why Arjuna is trying to find out for himself. That is, he does not want to be deceived. So how can one recognize this person? A wonderful question. And then come the details of this question. How does he sit? What does he speak about? How does he express his thoughts? How does he sit and how does he walk? These are, as it were, the details of this question. But the essence of the question is, how can one recognize a saintly person, a divine person? How can one recognize a person who possesses Krishna consciousness? A wonderful question. It was not for nothing that I was glorifying Arjuna. We immediately see that when Arjuna speaks, this is speech. This is truly the speech of a reasonable person. A wonderful question. Right on target. And by the way, in our time, this is a very, I would say, relevant question because, as I said, nowadays every dog says that I am a saintly person. You understand? There. And since people do not know the answer to this question, they blindly follow sinners. As Prabhupada explains, in modern civilization, one blind man leads a crowd of blind men, and they all fall into a ditch. Not knowing the answer to this question, as they say, don't wade into the water if you don't know the ford. But people do not know, and therefore they blindly follow another blind man just like themselves, and they all fall into the ditch. That is, you see? Therefore, of course, one should follow only a truly divine person. And if we apply this question to ourselves, then for us the answer to this question has already been found. Prabhupada. That's it. That is, for us, the question of searching for a divine person, to whom to entrust our soul, whom to follow in our life, has already been found. I personally found him for myself at the age of 20. And any reasonable person who reads Prabhupada's books perfectly understands that this is truly a saintly person. And Prabhupada's books are unlike any other book. I have told many times how sharply I saw this difference, to such a degree that all the other books I had, and by the way, I had only selected books, that is, what had truly been useful to me in life, that is, books by which I lived. I always understood that my own brains are good, as the saying goes. One head is good, but two are better. That is, from the very beginning, I always had the understanding that there are more experienced people who know more, who have already worked out certain rules for life. Therefore, I always had books to which I turned, or by which I lived, or from which I applied one or another rule in life. But when I read Prabhupada's books, I was so impressed that I simply understood that, it turns out, everything I have is garbage. And so I gathered them all into a pile and threw them into the trash. And without any regret, with complete firm conviction that it was garbage. And since then I read, reveling and reading Prabhupada's books. Yes, everything in genius is simple. So this question, I would say, for us was opened and then closed. The question is closed. Why? Because the answer has already been found, Prabhupada. And this question is very relevant for people who follow false gurus, false leaders, and so on. For them, this question is very relevant. But for us, there is already an answer to this question. So our search for a saintly person has already ended successfully, like that film In Search of Captain Grant. And there too, I no longer remember how it went. In my opinion, they found him. Yes, they found Captain Grant, and that too ended successfully. Likewise, our search for a saintly person also ended successfully. Only we did not even set sail anywhere on a ship. We simply opened a book and found Prabhupada. That's it. The question is closed. The book is open, but the question is closed. How do you like that version? That is how it happens in life. We open Prabhupada's book, and immediately all questions are closed. That is, answers to all questions are found. In this lies the uniqueness of Prabhupada, his books, and his teaching. Well then, with your permission, now the commentary on this, I emphasize wonderful verse, this verse question. Just as a person occupying one or another position in society can be recognized by certain signs. Yes, I just gave the example of a general, that one can recognize a military man there, a general or someone else by signs, let us say, military clothing, a military gait, military speech, military behavior too, a military voice. They say, oh, you never served in the army. Why do you have such a commanding voice? You can often hear such things among people, you understand? That is, it's easy to recognize, yes? And we read further. So too a person endowed with Krishna consciousness can be recognized by the way he speaks, walks, thinks, and so on. Yes, and precisely in this connection, thank God we have preserved video of Prabhupada, that is his photographs, conversations, letters. So in this respect, all the details have been preserved for us, fortunately. And I simply watch, reveling in every movement, every, so to speak, movement of the face, hand, leg. Well, everything Prabhupada does simply conquers the heart and soul. Yes. That is, Krishna arranged it so that all these documentary videos, photographs, letters have been preserved for us, by which one can, as it were, understand Prabhupada's behavior. So we have all this visibly before us, by the mercy of Krishna and Prabhupada. Further we read, the corresponding signs make it possible to distinguish the rich from the poor, the healthy from the sick, and the learned from the ignorant. And in exactly the same way, a person possessing divine consciousness, or Krishna consciousness, is recognized by how he behaves in different situations. These signs are listed in the subsequent verses of the Bhagavad-gita. The main distinguishing quality of a person possessing Krishna consciousness, however, as of any other person, is his words. It is said that a fool, especially one who is well-dressed, cannot be recognized until he speaks. But as soon as he opens his mouth, it immediately becomes clear who he is. Yes, I do not remember who says this. In my opinion, it is Chanakya Pandit. Prabhupada quotes a saying of Chanakya Pandit. There, in my opinion, there is such a saying that a fool cannot be recognized until he speaks. That is, in my opinion, a saying, one of the sayings of Chanakya Pandit. There. Well, those are, so to speak, details. The fact is that speech, yes. So, the main trait of a person, we read further, who has attained Krishna consciousness, is that he speaks only about Krishna or about that which is connected with him. This sign is followed by all the others given below. Yes, that is Prabhupada, as if jumping ahead for our own good, gave us the answer right there in the question. A hint. And not just a hint, but the answer. The answer. Well, this can also be called a hint and an answer to the question. The main answer. That is, from the very beginning, we already know the correct answer before Arjuna even had time to ask. There is yet another confirmation of Prabhupada's books for you, and people who do not read Prabhupada's Bhagavad-gita have no idea of the answer to this question. You understand? The answer is given not in the verses, but in the commentaries. The main trait of a person conscious of Krishna is that he speaks only about Krishna, or about that which is connected with him. You understand? And you will not hear such an answer in any verse of the Bhagavad-gita from Krishna. He gives, of course, veiled answers, philosophical ones. We will be reading them now, not right now, but in the coming days, that is tomorrow, and so on. He speaks from such a high, so to speak, level, you understand. Whereas here Prabhupada gives it to us on a silver platter, in plain, simple, clear, and understandable language. The main trait is that he speaks only about Krishna, or about that which is connected with him. There. And if you see Prabhupada, whether on video, on audio, in his recordings, letters, correspondence, conversations, meetings, and so on, there is always only one topic, Krishna or that which is connected with Krishna, such as purchasing, let's say, land for a temple, or purchasing the temple itself, purchasing deities, preaching, organizing some festival, that is, everything connected with Krishna. That's all Prabhupada spoke about. And as soon as I have said many times, as soon as a free minute appears, Prabhupada immediately begins chanting Hare Krishna. There is some delay during initiation, for example, or during a lecture, or after a lecture, or some interview with someone there. The slightest pause and Prabhupada immediately begins chanting Hare Krishna. And he also tells the other disciples, chant Hare Krishna while this delay there, some technical issue or something else, gets resolved. You understand? That is, Prabhupada fills any time with Krishna. You understand? Because there's a saying, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. That is, as soon as a person is not engaged, as people say, leave me alone, leave me alone. But the fact is that you cannot be left alone. Either you are engaged in serving Krishna, or you are engaged in serving the external material energy, as we read this morning, the goddess Durga. That is, no one will ever leave you alone in your life. You simply have a choice of whom to serve, either Krishna or Durga. The external energy, as we read this morning, the wife of Shiva, the mistress of the material world. And so service to Durga may seem like, oh, Shiva's wife, a goddess, a woman, Durga, there. But in reality, the goddess Durga gives her servants nothing but suffering. That is precisely why all materialists, although they faithfully serve Durga all their lives, in factories, in plants, in trenches, and in tunnels, walking against in mines, serve faithfully, but receive nothing but suffering as a token of gratitude, in quotation mark. That is, service to material energy brings the soul nothing but suffering. Therefore, when a person says, "Leave me alone," and goes away from Krishna, it means only one thing, that he immediately falls into the white little hands of the goddess Durga. I already forgot what color. In my opinion, white. And in my opinion, Shiva is also white, only he is black because he is constantly covered with ash. But otherwise his skin too is white, as far as I remember. We read the description, well, again details, the fact is that into Durga's white little hand, and this Durga, material energy, is not depicted with that trident for nothing, because of the threefold suffering. Suffering is clear enough. That's it. For him the laws of a free man are already closed. He now lives by new laws, the laws of prison. That is the first thing they read to him. As soon as they bring him to prison, they read, "These are your duties, such and such, you are allowed this and this, you are forbidden this and this," so that from the very beginning he knows by what laws he is beginning to live. This is, one might say, a new life. Life according to the laws of prison. And likewise here, as soon as a person refuses to serve Krishna, he immediately falls under the strict laws of material energy. And no matter how he serves it, as I say, whether he is a millionaire or poor, the wage is always the same, threefold suffering. Durga has nothing else for her slaves. Do you understand? Therefore, a reasonable person, of course, surrenders himself to Krishna, and never in his life says, "Leave me alone, leave me in peace." Yes, do you understand? On the contrary, he dedicates himself. That is precisely why Krishna said in the previous verses, "Dedicate yourself to devotional service. Surrender to devotional service." This was not said for nothing, it was for our benefit. Because if we refuse to serve Krishna, then we will suffer, serving in the material world. There is no third option.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,